Welcome to Thread Hub. Let's get started with today's story. My name is Daniel. For most of my adult life, I made my living as a commercial electrician. Before that, I served 6 years in the Marine Corps. Sitting around feeling sorry for myself was never really my thing. When something stopped working, I repaired it. When trouble showed up, I handled it. Simple system. Not exactly poetry, but it got the job done. That was also how I treated my marriage to Monica. We had been together for 8 years. We owned a house just outside Indianapolis. No children. We both had solid careers, paid our bills, and kept the lawn from becoming a wildlife preserve. From the outside, our life looked perfectly ordinary. Monica coordinated restaurant launches for a hospitality group. She traveled more often than I did and seemed to know every chef, contractor, designer, and smooth-talking consultant in the industry. About a year before our divorce, she began mentioning a man named Blake Mercer. At first, there was nothing strange about it. Blake rescued the Cincinnati opening. Blake persuaded the owner to redesign the entire dining room. Blake was one of the most brilliant people she had ever worked with. I barely gave it a thought. Then his name started appearing every day. At dinner. In the car. While we watched television. Blake did this. Blake said that. Blake apparently hung the moon, fixed the plumbing, and probably taught fire how to burn. One evening, I finally looked up from my food. Does that man ever stop talking? Monica laughed. What? You mention him more often than you mention your own relatives. She rolled her eyes. Don't be absurd. Maybe that was the moment I should have started paying closer attention. A few months later, the evening work meetings began. Monica would leave around 6 and return sometime after 10. Sometimes 11. The explanation was always dressed in professional language. Dinner with a client. Meeting with a supplier. Planning for an opening. I never searched her phone. I never followed her car. I had no interest in becoming some bargain bin private investigator hiding behind bushes with binoculars. But I noticed things. One Thursday evening, she entered the kitchen while I was washing up after work. I have another dinner tonight, she said. Who's going? Some people from the company. I nodded. Then she reached for her purse a little too quickly. Don't stay up. That sentence stuck with me. Not because of the words themselves. Because she delivered them before I had even asked another question. I watched her pull out of the driveway. Then I remembered the restaurant she had mentioned earlier that week, a downtown place called the Briarwood House. I checked the time. 6:42, then I picked up the keys to my truck. If there was nothing going on, I would order dinner, feel mildly stupid, and drive home. If there was something going on, I would learn the truth that night. Either outcome sounded better than sitting in my kitchen inventing explanations for her. I parked across from the Briarwood house and remained in the truck for about 10 seconds. It wasn't fear. I just understood that once I stepped through those doors, whatever came next could not be stuffed back into the box. The restaurant was crowded. Typical Thursday night. Couples on dates, families trying to keep children seated, and businesspeople pretending their appetizers were important. I entered and searched the dining room. Finding Monica took less than 5 seconds. She wasn't with a team from work. She wasn't entertaining clients. She was sitting in a corner booth with Blake Mercer. Just the two of them. I recognized him from photographs on her company's website. Designer watch. Haircut sharp enough to require a building permit. He had the polished look of a man who devoted considerable energy to appearing successful, whether or not success had received the invitation. But he wasn't the part that mattered. Monica was. She was smiling in a way I had not seen her smile in months. Blake leaned across the table and placed his hand over hers. She left it there. That was all I needed. I crossed the restaurant without slowing down. Monica noticed me first. The color vanished from her face. Daniel? Blake turned around, and his confident little smile disappeared as if somebody had switched it off. I stopped beside their table. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Monica rose from the booth. This isn't what it looks like. I nearly laughed. Seriously? Blake cleared his throat. Listen, man. I cut him off. Don't. The word came out quiet, cold, and final. He closed his mouth. I looked at Monica. You told me this was a company dinner. It is. No. I gestured toward the unused seats around the table. This is a date. People nearby had begun watching. Nothing attracts attention in a restaurant quite like someone else's disaster. Dinner and a show, apparently. Monica lowered her voice. Can we discuss this outside? We can discuss it here. Blake shifted in his seat, suddenly fascinated by everything except me. Monica's embarrassment turned into anger. You don't trust me? I stared at her for a moment. Then I nodded toward Blake. You're having dinner alone with another man after lying to me, and you want to make this about my trust? Neither one of them replied. That silence answered more than either of them could have. I reached into my pocket, removed my wedding ring, and set it on the table. Monica's eyes widened. Daniel, don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I looked at Blake and then back at her. You already did. I turned and walked away. Monica called after me before I reached the entrance. I kept moving. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. By the time I climbed into my truck, I already knew who I would call next. It wasn't my wife. It was an attorney. Some choices require careful consideration. Others are kind enough to walk into a restaurant, sit in a corner booth, and introduce themselves. I met with a divorce lawyer the following morning before work. The consultation lasted 25 minutes. I gave him the facts. No dramatic speech. No shouting. No emotional collapse in his office. Just the facts. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. You're sure about this? Yes. Do you want to try marriage counseling first? No. He nodded once. That concluded the philosophical portion of the meeting. 3 days later, the legal process had begun. A week after that, Monica finally understood that I was not threatening her or trying to scare her. She came home one evening and found 3 boxes stacked beside the front door. My clothes. My paperwork. My personal tools. Nothing belonging to her. Nothing from the house that we might later argue over. She stood in the entryway staring at the boxes. You're actually going through with this? I looked up from the kitchen table. I'm not going to. I already am. Monica dropped her purse on the counter. You saw one dinner. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed since the night at the restaurant. Monica, please don't insult my intelligence. Her jaw tightened. Nothing happened. Then why did you lie? She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. After a moment, she reached for a different explanation. Blake understands my career. There it was. What? The real answer. She folded her arms. You never supported what I wanted. I stood. No. I pointed toward the driveway. I worked overtime so we could afford this house. Then I pointed toward the garage. I paid the tuition for your master's degree. Finally, I looked directly at her. Don't rewrite our entire marriage just because you found a replacement. For a second, she turned her eyes away. It was the nearest thing to guilt I had seen from her. Then it vanished. I deserve to be happy. I nodded. Then go be happy. That response seemed to surprise her. There was no argument. No begging. No offer to change. No negotiation. Just acceptance. She stared at me as though I had missed my cue. That's all you have to say? What exactly were you expecting? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both knew. She expected me to fight for her. She expected me to compete with Blake. She expected me to chase her, make promises, and audition for a role I had already held for 8 years. Instead, I lifted one of the boxes. I'm not competing against another man for my own wife. The room fell silent. I carried the box toward the door. Behind me, Monica spoke again. Where are you going? I opened the door. Somewhere better than here. 2 weeks later, I accepted a job with a major electrical contractor in Dallas. A month after that, I left Indiana. The divorce continued while I settled into Texas. For the first time in years, I was focused on where I was going instead of constantly looking behind me. What I did not know was that Monica and Blake were already making plans of their own. Bigger plans. And much faster ones. Moving to Dallas turned out to be the smartest decision I had made in a long time. There was plenty of work, and the money was better. The company handled large commercial construction projects throughout Texas. Within a few months, I was supervising crews instead of simply working as part of one. I rented a small house outside Fort Worth, bought another truck, and returned to the routine that had always kept me steady. Wake up. Work. Train. Sleep. No drama. No excuses. Just progress. My younger sister, Claire, called every few weeks to make sure I was still alive and not surviving entirely on black coffee and stubbornness. Unlike most people, Claire understood boundaries. She never volunteered updates about Monica unless I asked. She didn't treat my divorce like a television series that required weekly recaps. One evening, roughly 6 months after I moved to Texas, she called while I was finishing paperwork. You busy? That depends. I heard something today. I already knew where the conversation was headed. Monica? Yeah. I leaned back in my chair. What happened? There was a brief pause. Then Claire laughed. Not because the news was funny. More because reality had apparently decided subtlety was overrated. She and Blake are getting married. I frowned. Already? The wedding is 3 months from now. I glanced at the calendar sitting on my desk. Our divorce had become final only a few days earlier. That meant Monica planned to marry Blake barely 3 months after officially ending our marriage. I wasn't shocked. If anything, the timing explained quite a bit. People usually don't sprint toward marriage like the building is on fire unless the relationship started well before the previous one was buried. Well, I said, good luck to them. Claire went quiet. Then she said something unexpected. That's actually why I called. What do you mean? My company was hired for their reception. That got my attention. Claire worked for an event rental company. They supplied tables, chairs, lighting, linens, decorations, and all the other expensive objects people rent so their relatives can complain about the wedding in comfort. Apparently, Monica and Blake had reserved one of the largest venues outside Indianapolis, a restored country estate called Ashford Grove Manor. Can you get reassigned? I asked. No. Then do the work and leave. That's the plan. I meant it. I had no desire for revenge. I didn't want Claire interfering, reporting back, or accidentally launching a champagne-fueled family war. That part of my life was finished. At least, that was what I believed. 3 weeks before the wedding, Claire called again. This time, her voice was different. There was no amusement in it. Only concern. You know that feeling when something doesn't quite fit? What doesn't fit? She lowered her voice. I met someone connected to Blake today. I frowned. Who? A woman named Natalie. The name meant nothing to me. But Claire's tone told me enough. Whatever Natalie knew about Blake, it probably wasn't going to improve the wedding slideshow. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. I was in Texas supervising a warehouse project when Claire called during her lunch break. The reception had not started yet. "You were right," she said. "About what?" "Natalie." I moved away from the crew and found a quieter place beside the building. "What happened?" Claire took a breath. "I met her again this morning. And she used to date Blake. That alone wasn't particularly unusual." Then Claire added the useful part. "While he was dating someone else. Now she had my full attention." Natalie apparently worked in restaurant management and had known Blake for several years. According to her, Blake had a habit of overlapping relationships. Nothing theatrical. No secret apartment filled with disguises. He was simply dishonest in a very organized way. He would tell one woman one version of his life and give another woman an entirely different version. The problem for Blake was that Natalie had kept evidence. Pictures. Text messages. Dates. A complete timeline. Enough information to make a liar sweat through an expensive suit. "Is she attending the wedding?" I asked. "She's already at the venue." That surprised me. "As a guest?" "As someone's plus one." I shook my head. That sounds like a disaster waiting for a microphone. That's exactly what worries me. Before we ended the call, I gave Claire the same advice I had given her from the start. Stay out of it. I plan to. Do your job and go home. She agreed. A few hours later, I was wrapping up for the day when my phone began vibrating. 3 calls from Claire. One after another. Then a fourth. I answered immediately. What happened? For a moment, all I could hear was noise behind her. Voices. Music. People talking over one another. Then Claire finally spoke. "Daniel?" Her tone told me everything I needed to know. Something had gone seriously wrong. What happened? The speeches. I leaned against my truck. What about them? Claire released a slow breath. Blake stood up and started talking about destiny. Of course he did. Men like Blake always discover destiny shortly after booking a photographer. Claire continued. He said some people spend their whole lives trying to find the person they're meant to be with. I could already guess the next part. Then he said he knew Monica was the one from the first moment they met. And that was when Claire told me the last thing Blake needed to hear at his own reception. Natalie stood up. What did she say? Claire laughed again. Not because any of it was amusing. Because she still couldn't believe someone had actually done it. She looked straight at Blake and said, "That's interesting, because you told me the exact same thing while you were involved with somebody else." I stood there without speaking. Monica and Blake's elegant wedding reception had just developed a plot. And Natalie had apparently only finished the introduction. According to Claire, the entire room went silent the moment Natalie spoke. Blake froze. Monica looked confused. Most of the guests had no idea who Natalie was or why she had just thrown a hand grenade into the toast. Blake recovered first. He forced a smile. I think there's been some confusion. Natalie remained standing. No, there hasn't. Then she took out her phone. That was when the afternoon began falling apart properly. Claire later told me Natalie never shouted. She didn't cry. She didn't insult anyone or throw a drink. She stayed completely calm. Which made the whole thing considerably worse. She began presenting the details one at a time. Dates. Messages. Private conversations. Promises Blake had made to her. Every new piece connected neatly to the last. And none of it had happened years earlier. None of it had taken place before Monica entered the picture. It had occurred during the exact period when Blake and Monica claimed they were falling madly in love. The atmosphere in the room became painfully uncomfortable. Monica kept looking from Natalie to Blake, waiting for one of them to provide an explanation that didn't sound ridiculous. Finally, she asked Blake directly. "Who is she?" He hesitated. That hesitation was his mistake. Natalie answered for him. "I'm someone he promised a future to." The best man immediately became deeply interested in his drink. Several guests quietly stood and moved toward the bar, because when a wedding starts collapsing, apparently hydration becomes essential. Blake tried once more to regain control. "Natalie, this isn't the place." She nodded. "You're right." Then she said the sentence people would repeat for weeks afterward. She looked directly at Monica. "If a man leaves one relationship to begin another with you, sooner or later, he'll leave yours to begin one with someone else." No one moved. No one spoke. Even from hundreds of miles away, I could imagine the expression on Monica's face. Claire said she had never watched a person lose color that quickly. Blake reached for Monica's hand. She pulled it away. That single movement told the room more than any explanation could have. The speeches ended soon afterward. The music started again. The reception continued, technically. But the mood was gone. People whispered behind napkins and wineglasses. Questions moved from table to table. And Blake could do absolutely nothing to stop them. Claire assumed the worst of the evening was over. It wasn't. About 10 minutes later, she made a decision she had not planned to make. She stood up. Not to start another scene. Not to humiliate anybody. She only wanted to say one thing before she left. One sentence. A sentence that made half the guests turn and look at Monica. And according to Claire, it landed harder than everything Natalie had already revealed. After saying it, Claire collected her things and walked directly out of the reception. When she called me later that night, she was sitting in her car outside the estate. I could hear crickets through the phone. "You actually stood up?" I asked. "I did." I laughed. My sister hated speaking in front of people. At our cousin's wedding, she had once escaped giving a toast by pretending she had suddenly lost her voice. "What did you say?" There was a brief pause. Then she answered. "I looked at Monica and said, 'My brother gave you 8 years. Let's hope this marriage survives longer than 3 months.'" I leaned back in my chair. Clean. Direct. No shouting. No name-calling. Just an inconvenient little fact dressed as a sentence. "What happened after that?" I asked. "Nothing." "What do you mean, nothing?" I picked up my bag and left. That was Claire. She had no interest in debates. She said what she intended to say, then removed herself before anyone could turn it into a committee meeting. The real damage came later. Over the next several weeks, people began talking. Not because of Claire. Not even entirely because of Natalie. Once the first questions appeared, other answers followed. A former client said Blake had flirted aggressively with her during a consulting job. Then another story surfaced. Then another. None of them was devastating by itself. But lined up together, they formed a very clear picture. Blake wasn't the man people believed him to be. He was the kind of man who treated boundaries like optional road signs whenever ignoring them worked in his favor. News travels quickly in professional circles. In hospitality, it moves even faster. Everyone knows everyone, and half of them have shared a conference room, a restaurant opening, or an unpleasant bottle of wine. Within 2 months, several of Blake's contracts disappeared. Then a few more. Then Monica began hearing things she did not particularly enjoy hearing. Nearly 6 months after the wedding, Claire called me again one afternoon. "You're not going to believe this." "What happened now?" "Monica moved out." That caught my attention. "What happened?" No one knows the entire story. I suspected I knew enough. Trust is expensive. Once it's damaged, every conversation costs more.
Apparently, Blake and Monica had been arguing. There were money problems.
Questions about previous relationships. Questions about current relationships. Questions about women whose names Monica had never heard before.
The same suspicions that had followed Blake for years were now living inside their house. The difference was that Monica was finally standing on the receiving end of them. The woman who had left me for Blake was beginning to understand the man she had actually married. And according to Claire, she wasn't impressed with the final product. A few weeks later, something happened that genuinely surprised me.
Monica called.
It was the first time I had heard from her in almost 2 years. I nearly let the call go unanswered.
Her number was no longer saved in my phone. But I recognized it immediately.
Some numbers remain in your memory long after you have stopped needing them. The brain is helpful like that, keeps the useless things, forgets where you left your keys.
I let the phone ring twice. Then I answered. Hello. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Monica spoke. Hi, Daniel.
Her voice sounded different.
Less certain. Older, somehow. What do you need? I asked.
There was no reason for small talk. We were far beyond pretending we had called to discuss the weather.
She released a quiet breath. I heard you're doing well. I am. Claire said you were promoted. She talks too much. Monica gave a small laugh. Then silence returned.
Finally, she said what she had called to say.
Blake and I are getting divorced. I wasn't shocked. Not even slightly. Okay. One word. Nothing more. Monica remained quiet for several seconds.
I think she had expected a stronger reaction.
Maybe sympathy. Maybe satisfaction. Maybe anger. I gave her none of those. That's all you're going to say? What would you like me to say? Another pause.
Then she asked the question she had really called to ask.
Do you ever think about what happened between us? I looked through the window of my house.
The sun was setting beyond the fence. Earlier that afternoon, a project manager had offered me another major contract.
My days were busy. My work mattered.
My home was quiet.
My life was peaceful and moving forward.
The past rarely stopped by anymore.
Not really, I said.
The truth seemed to hurt her more than an insult would have. I made a mistake, Daniel.
Probably more than one. She didn't argue. There wasn't much room for it.
Then she said something I had not expected.
I thought you would fight for me. I shook my head, though she couldn't see me.
Monica, a man fights for a marriage when both people are still protecting it.
Neither of us spoke. After a while, she answered quietly. I understand that now. Maybe she did.
Maybe she only understood it because the consequences had finally arrived at her address.
Either way, it was no longer my problem to solve. We ended the call a few minutes later. There was no dramatic farewell. No promise to remain friends. No agreement to keep in touch. Just two people whose lives had taken separate roads. 8 months later, Claire sent me a photograph.
Monica was leaving the courthouse with divorce papers in her hand. Marriage number 2 was officially finished.
I looked at the picture for about 5 seconds. Then I deleted it. Not because I was angry. Because I had no use for it.
Years earlier, Monica had assumed I would never move on without her. That was the ironic part. The day she walked away from our marriage was the same day my life finally began heading somewhere better.
I set my phone down and returned to work. And for the first time in a very long while, there was absolutely nothing behind me worth turning around to see. Thank you for watching.